agenda, and that's why there's continuity of agenda in the U.S. Doesn't matter who the president is. From since I've been paying attention, Bush Jr. To Obama to Trump to Biden, it doesn't matter. It's the same agenda. They just spin it a little bit differently. The same people are in their cabinets. The same people from these think tanks, these unelected think tanks, exist and drive U.S. foreign policy and also domestic policy to a certain degree, regardless of who's in the White House. So that's important to understand. And then Western-style democracy in a country like the Philippines, or here, say, in Thailand, it's exactly as you say. You actually have circles of interest that represent the people in this country. And then you also have a circle of interests that answer to Washington. And if one of these, a member from this foreign-controlled circle of interest gets into power, they will drive the country in an entirely opposite direction of the best interests of the people in that country, best interests of the country's future. They will run the country into the ground, just as what we see going on in Ukraine from 2014 onward. We talked quite a bit about that. And so it's the exact same case for the Philippines. The problem with the Philippines is they were literally a U.S. colony until 1946. I don't know if people know that or not. They were literally a U.S. colony until 1946. And they get their independence from the U.S. from 1946 onward, but so much of their political system had been conditioned by the United States. And this is why when you go to the Philippines, there's so many people that speak perfect English. And even to this day, there are a lot of institutional and administrative systems of control that the U.S. uses to create the next generation of subordinated Filipino leaders. I was just watching a video from CSIS. It's a U.S. government and arms industry funded think tank, and it's titled "A New Era in the U.S.-Philippines Alliance: A Discussion with Foreign Secretary Enrique Manalo." So he came to Washington. He was talking to CSIS, and one of the things that he praised was the U.S. Fulbright program and also Peace Corps, how long it's been going on in the Philippines, because it was literally a colony of the U.S. And what they said, the way they introduced it, this is what they literally said. They said it is to create the new and future constituencies of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. And when they say alliance, that is a euphemism. It is not an alliance. It is not a two-way partnership. It is the subordination of the Philippines to the U.S. at the expense of the people in the Philippines. The Philippines has a much larger population than, say, Thailand, but its economy is a wreck. Why is that? Because everything that the government does is done to serve U.S. interests, not the Philippines' interests. There's a lot of people in the Philippines who understand this and are against this. This is what constituted the support base for Duterte. But this is the problem. Where do you find another Duterte? It's very hard because so many people in the ruling class in the Philippines have been literally conditioned by these administrative organizations the U.S. imposes on the Philippines and also everywhere else around the world. And then you have the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and all these other programs the U.S. uses to work their way into every aspect of the Philippines, politically, socially, economically, militarily. You have all these training programs for officers in the Philippines. And then these officers, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to lend their support to an agenda that dovetails with Washington's, even if it's at the expense of the Philippines, because they're part of that club. They want to stay part of that club. If you look at the trade, and I'm looking at the trade right now, between where it exports and where it imports from, China, by far, is their largest trade partner for imports and exports. The U.S. is a very small percentage. Most of the Philippines' trade is in Asia. So the trade within Asia is the most important for the economy of the Philippines. I got to kind of look over this thing on the screen. So a stable Asia is what is in the best interests of the Philippines, and yet they are allowing the United States to reoccupy it militarily, because that had been a thing for a long time even after the Philippines got independence, a very large U.S. military presence there. And the Filipinos had gotten them out, and now they're coming back in. And what do you think the U.S. is going to do in the region with this military presence? They are going to use it to destabilize the region and to transform the Philippines into a battering ram against its largest trade partner, China. So it's inconceivable when you look at it rationally. But of course, we're talking about decades of conditioning an entire population to be subservient to the United States.
Yeah, exactly, Brian. And I was also reading some history about Marcus Jr. and also his father, Marcus Sr. And I'm not going to talk about the full history of it, but his father was very, very corrupt. He had lots of human rights abuses, and he was eventually pushed out of power, and he fled the Philippines, and he moved to Hawaii, where he was given a nice house and looked after by the US. And Marcus Jr. was actually raised in Hawaii, and he moved on to the United States and studied there. And looks like he's a perfect candidate, basically carrying on from his father's work, because his father basically completely capitulated to the United States at the time and completely destroyed the country, and that's why he had to flee. But looks like Marcus Jr. has been conditioned from a young age, and he's been trained, and now he's gone to Philippines to basically give it back to the United States and to use however they want. And I just feel sorry for the Filipinos, because any conflict that happens in the Taiwanese Strait, even in the South China Sea, I can see Filipinos being dragged into a war that they do not want, and this is going to be really, really bad for not only Filipino people but for the economy. And also Philippines, they've always had civil wars in the past, and Philippines has got a lot of islands, and everybody in different islands wants to be independent. So there's a lot of issues in Philippines, and and last thing they want is to be roped into another war. And the Filipinos, I don't know if you remember the Second World War, the Japanese invaded Philippines, and then the US took over from the Japanese, and they've always been a race that's been invaded, and it's about time they had some actual freedom and went along their own path. It looks like now they've gone back to the US's arms again, and now they're going to be, like you said, a battering ram in any future war against China. And do they not watch the news? Do they not see what's happened to Afghanistan, Ukraine, Iraq, Libya? I mean, these Filipino people, they're going to be used just as they are using the Ukrainians up till the last Filipino, till they get what they want. I mean, I just don't understand. There's a video on the internet by MSNBC, the one we went through, where they were actively using Philippines, as a base to attack China. And do they not watch these videos? I just don't understand the mentality of people around this world. I mean, what are your thoughts?
The conditioning that the U.S. has imposed on the Philippines for decades and decades now, over a century, really, it has transformed many people in the population into people who are blind to reality. So even if you showed them that, they wouldn't believe it. Just like most Americans, you try to talk to them about what the U.S. government is actually doing versus what they think it's doing because of what MSNBC or Fox News told them. There's a complete disconnect between them and reality. And the deeper this conditioning goes, the harder it is to break. So that is one problem the Philippines has. I was listening to the Secretary of Foreign Affairs from the Philippines speaking at that CSIS event, and he was constantly talking about how, the Philippines has to be in this partnership with the U.S. for the future of Asia. Does he not realize that the U.S. is not even located in Asia? Does he not also realize that the Philippines' largest trading partner is China, not the United States? The U.S. is actually kind of low on the scale there, on the list. He also talked a lot about international law, upholding international law with the help of the U.S., and they talked about Taiwan constantly. I mean, this is one of the main reasons they're putting these military bases there, just like you said, that shamelessly and openly using the Philippines in this war against China. And they would rather have the Philippines pay the cost for this war rather than the US pay the cost. So they're talking about Taiwan, they're talking about international law, and they're omitting the fact that it's the United States and its violation of its own agreement with Beijing and international law that is at the core of this conflict and these tensions over the island province of Taiwan. So it's unbelievable. It's from the lower levels of society in the Philippines all the way up to the top. And then even if Marcos Jr. wanted to rebalance, another thing that this Secretary of Foreign Affairs kept saying continuously, parroting verbatim U.S. State Department talking points about U.S. foreign policy, claiming that it's the Philippines' foreign policy also. And he constantly and very deliberately kept saying, this is our independent foreign policy, as if just saying that would throw us off from the fact that you are parroting verbatim what the U.S. State Department says is U.S. foreign policy. So it is so sad and painful to watch a nation with so many people with so much potential being driven into the ground by people who are subservient to the U.S., a nation on the other side of the Pacific Ocean that is going to commit the Philippines to years more of working against their own best interests, and it could possibly lead to a war that will destroy the country again.
Yeah, exactly, Brian. And also, if you look at where the military bases are located, 3 of them are facing directly Taiwan, and 1 of them is facing the South China Sea. If the US wanted to help Philippines, or the Filipinos are saying, oh, these military bases are to help us if we have any any weather events or anything like that, so the US can help us. But why face 3 of them towards Taiwan, and why face 1 of them in the South China Sea? It doesn't make any sense. Their narrative doesn't make any sense. It's obviously targeted to China. And I was also reading some books about the history of the South China Sea as well. And I basically found out very recently that the islands that Philippines controls, when USA was basically running Philippines at the time, they needed some military bases, and it was the US that actually pushed Philippines to grab those islands in the South China Sea. And the reason China could not take them back, because they had a military backing by the United States, and they obviously had this they're also protecting Taiwan as well. They're also protecting the South China Sea islands away from China at the time. And and China obviously was very weak at the time because the civil wars, and also they were very, very poor back in the day. So they didn't really have any capacity to take these islands back, because the US was basically patrolling them. Same with Taiwan as well. So it was all down, if you look at the history, it was all down to the US. And now Philippines have taken over the South China Sea, and now they're claiming all of South China Sea. In fact, they are now renaming South China Sea into West Philippine Sea. I don't know if you noticed.
Yes,
I mean, it's gone to the point where if you look at Western maps, or if you look at Google Maps, it clearly says West Philippine Sea rather than South China Sea. So it's crazy how the West thinks. And what are your thoughts about this? It's only recently I found this out, which was quite fascinating, actually.
It's very important for people to understand history, what really actually happens. And we can consistently hear the US complaining about Russia and China being revisionists. But when you actually look at the history, these are things that should be revised, because it was a tremendous injustice. It was the US and Europe playing empire all around the globe at the expense of absolutely everyone else on Earth. And these are things that should be righted. And yet, instead, the collective West is trying to reimpose themselves, reassert themselves over their former colonial holdings. So that's one part of it. going back to this CSIS talk with the Secretary of Foreign Affairs from the Philippines is very important, because the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, that's a very senior position in the government of the Philippines. And so people should listen to it. Now, he's in Washington. Of course, maybe that's why it was such a pro-US speech. There was zero balance in it at all. He did refer to the South China Sea a couple of times as the South China Sea, but mostly as the West Philippine Sea. He was, every time he's talking about China and how there's all this trade and everything. We all know that China builds a tremendous amount of infrastructure with its partners. Then when he talked about ties with the US, it was all of these ambiguous word salads that mean absolutely nothing. The only tangible partnership that the US has with the Philippines is militarily, and it's only so that the US can use the Philippines as a staging point for its war with China. Again, the Philippines' largest trading partner, and this would be a war fought in Asia, where the Philippines does most of its business, a region that, if it is destabilized, will completely and utterly destroy the Philippines economy. So it's unreal how they're going along with this, how they're pretending that this is a fruitful relationship with the Philippines, and not, again, just as you've been explaining, this is just a return to the age of imperialism. It's just being done camouflaged with the modern Western democratic liberal spin, but it is still colonization. It is modern day empire.
Exactly. And thanks for the super chat, Mr. Friendly Guys. These idiots that tried to rename French fries into freedom fries. So no surprises they try and rename the seas. I mean, I was around during the Iraq War, and I remember when
Freedom
the
fries.
Americans were so angry with the French for not going along with them with the Iraq War, they renamed all of their French fries into freedom fries. I thought that was the most hilarious thing I've ever heard. And obviously the French have been proved right, and the Americans have been proved wrong. So I have been to United States since then, and I think they have renamed it back now to French fries, which is good.
Yeah. I mean, it was never a serious thing, but it just goes to show how impulsive and childish the U.S. political system is. When Macron went to China and was talking about autonomy, basically an independent foreign policy for France that allows France to decide for itself. I saw Americans on TV, on Fox News, flipping out over the fact that the French want to have their own independent foreign policy and not be subordinated to the US. So they're angry about this, which in itself is an admission that this is true, that they are subordinated to the US. And you're angry that they want to have an independent foreign policy, and yet you're claiming that it's China that is the threat to everybody's freedom around the world, when in a very direct way, actually, you're admitting that the US is the one subjugating everyone. And you're upset with these countries solely because they're not okay with that. And nor should they be okay with it.
Exactly. And it does sound to me that out of all the European countries, there's only one or two with true sovereignty. And I think France is one of them, because I don't think France has any US troops in its soil. I've not heard about it anyway. I think France is one of them. Hungary is probably another, but Serbia maybe.
Yeah. Hungary, France, not really. I mean, they're not occupied by U.S. troops like so many other countries in Europe. But at the same time, they don't have an independent foreign policy. They do what the U.S. tells them to do, just like everyone else in Europe. And the few countries that don't, you will definitely hear about it. France is in trouble for just thinking about not listening.
I think not with the current leader, but I do remember France having an independent policy once upon a time. Back then with Chirac and in the Iraq War, and also before that, I can't remember his name, but he was threatening to pull out of NATO as well. That great French president. They named an arc after him, I think. I can't remember his name, but yeah, I think there was a few French presidents who were completely against Americanism. But unfortunately, the current one is a complete puppet, no spine whatsoever. So before I go to the next topic, I read another article that Marcus has actually gone back to China and tried to get some money out of them, because he obviously realized Filipino needs money, needs infrastructure. They need to help the economy. The United States is not going to do that, because this is why he went to the United States to basically negotiate with Biden, say, all right, we've given you these bases. What are you going to do for us? And Biden's pretty much turned around and said nothing. He's come back empty-handed from the United States. So yesterday I saw another article that Marcus wants to make another trip to China, and he says his agenda is going to try and get more investments, money, infrastructure, and apparently these stuff was promised by China to Duarte, and also promised to him in the first meeting. So he wants to kind of follow that on. So I don't know what China's going to think about it. They'll probably tell him to go away. Anyway, let's move on to the next one.